The orbital station New Eden hung in geosynchronous silence above Vega Prime, its kilometer-long spine glinting under the pale blue star like a needle stuck in black velvet. Admiral Elias Kane leaned against the observation deck's armored glass, arms crossed, watching the Xarath delegation S-shuttle dock with the grace of a predator that knows the prey is already dead. He was 52, gray at the temples, voice like gravel dragged over concrete, and right now every line on his face screamed the same thing. They were about to learn. The Xarath had arrived 6 years earlier, waving treaties written in light, promising partnership to a young species still burning chemical rockets to reach orbit. "Your kind is charmingly rudimentary," their high envoy had said during the first state dinner, mandibles clicking in what passed for polite laughter among them. "Harmless primitives playing at civilization, we will shepherd you into maturity." Elias had smiled then, thin and sharp, the same smile he worn when his old destroyer limped home from the Kuiper skirmishes, with half its crew gone and the other half singing drinking songs over the bodies. Humanity accepted the deals, signed the pacts, let Xarath survey teams crawl across every continent mapping resources they politely called underutilized. Then came the day the politely worded ultimatums arrived. The Xarath Council had decided after careful study that humans were too volatile, too tribal, too attached to dirt and blood and old grudges to be trusted with the stars unsupervised. The solution was elegant. Relocation to designated reservation worlds, population capped, technology frozen at pre-contact levels, culture archived as a museum exhibit titled The Curious Case of Saul's Last Savages. Refusal meant sterilization of the homeworld via relativistic impactors already en route. Elias had read the message aloud to the Joint Chiefs in perfect calm, then crushed the tablet under his boot. "They think we're pets," he told them. "Time to bite." Down on the surface, in the sprawling megacity of New Shanghai, streets that once thrummed with electric scooters and food carts now echoed with the clatter of boots and the low growl of heavy machinery. Colonel Aisha Rahman moved through the underground command bunker beneath the Yangtze Delta, her hijab tucked neatly under combat webbing, sidearm riding low on her hip. She had grown up hearing bedtime stories about how humans once starved, froze, drowned, and bombed each other into near extinction, then got back up anyway. Those stories weren't fairy tales anymore, they were doctrine. Across every continent, similar bunkers hummed with activity. In the Urals, engineers welded armor plates onto century-old T-14 chassis pulled from museums. In the American Midwest, farmers loaded grain silos with high-explosive slurry and remote triggers. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal trackers taught special forces how to disappear into red dirt and ghost gum shadows. Nobody was pretending this would be clean. The Xarath fleet arrived at dawn local time 73. Kilometer-long habitat ships escorted by dagger-shaped lancers that could core a moon in under a minute. They broadcast the same message on every frequency: lay down arms, board the transport arcs, accept stewardship. Resistance is futile and unnecessary. Aisha keyed her mic. "All commands. This is Razor 1. They just called us Harmless again. Let's fix that misunderstanding." The first human response wasn't a missile or a laser. It was music. Every remaining civilian broadcast tower, pirate radio station, car stereo, phone speaker, and jury-rigged PA system erupted at once with a single song, Beethoven's Ninth, Fourth Movement, cranked to distortion. The choral thunder rolled across cities, deserts, oceans, drowning the Xarath ultimatum in pure defiant noise. Then the shooting started. Old railguns bolted to cargo, freighters tore into the Lancers formation like chainsaws through silk. Suborbital dropships, tourist rockets packed with boarding teams, rammed the habitat ships at angles the Xarath had never modeled, because who expects primitives to kamikaze with chemical boosters? Inside those habitat cylinders, Marines in patched hardsuits fought room to room against towering Xarath warriors whose carapaces shrugged off small arms fire. The aliens expected terror. They got laughter, harsh, ragged, human laughter echoing down corridors as soldiers traded insults in a dozen languages while reloading. Elias watched the tactical display from New Eden as green icons flickered and red ones dimmed. A Xarath Lancer tried to ram the station. A trio of converted ore haulers met it head-on at 30 kilometers per second, turning both sides into expanding plasma confetti. He felt the station shudder from the distant shockwave. "They still don't get it," he muttered to his flag captain. "They think this is about territory, about resources. It's not." He pointed at the holla of Earth below, continents outlined in fire where ground battles raged. "It's about the story we tell ourselves every morning when we wake up. The story that says no matter how big the boot, no matter how sharp the teeth, we don't kneel, we bite, we claw, we keep standing." On Vega Prime's largest habitat cylinder, the Xarath Supreme Commander, Lord Admiral Kazoth Vor, stared at cascading failure reports. His mandibles trembled not with rage, but with something far worse, confusion. The primitives were not supposed to fight like this. They were supposed to beg, to fracture along old tribal lines, to collapse under the weight of inevitability. Instead, they sang while they died. They improvised weapons from museum pieces. They turned suicide runs into poetry. A junior officer approached, voice quavering. "Lord Admiral, the relocation arcs are taking heavy boarding action. Casualties exceed projections by orders of magnitude." HFY's compound eyes reflected the crimson tactical glow. "How?" he asked, almost to himself. "They are primitives." The officer hesitated. "They do not fight like primitives, my lord. They fight like they have done this before." On the surface, Aisha crouched behind a shattered maglev pylon as Xarath drop troops advanced through the burning streets. Her squad was down to 6. Ammo was low. She keyed the company net anyway. "Listen up. They still think we're harmless. So when they come through that intersection, give them everything we've got left, then smile while we do it. Let the last thing they see be us laughing." She stood, checked her rifle's charge, and started walking toward the enemy line. Behind her, the remaining 5 rose without a word. Above them, the sky flickered as another Xarath ship came apart in a silent flower of white fire. Elias turned from the viewport. The station's AI chimed softly incoming transmission from the flagship. He accepted. Xarath's towering form filled the hollow mandibles wide in what might have been outrage or fear. "Your species will be exterminated for this insolence," the alien declared. Elias met the gaze without blinking. "You keep using that word harmless. You keep saying primitive like it's an insult." He leaned closer to the pickup. "Let me explain something to you, Lord Admiral. We didn't crawl out of the mud, cross ice caps, sail wooden boats across oceans, split atoms, and walk on another world because we're harmless. We did it because the universe kept trying to kill us and we kept saying no." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You're not the first empire to think you can put a leash on us. You won't be the last to learn why that never works." HFY started to reply. Elias cut the feed. Alarms blared, final wave of Xarath reinforcements dropping. He straightened his uniform collar, glanced once more at the burning world below, and spoke to the empty deck. "All right, humanity, let's remind them why the stars are afraid of us." Somewhere in the wreckage of a fallen habitat cylinder, a lone human soldier, bleeding, laughing, raised a middle finger toward the retreating Xarath life pods and shouted into the smoke-choked dark. "Welcome to the neighborhood, ashholes. Next round's on you." The command deck of New Eden smelled of burnt insulation, recycled sweat, and the faint metallic temps of blood that never quite washed out of the deck plates no matter how many times the scrubbers ran. Admiral Elias Kane stood motionless at the central holly table, watching red enemy icons swarm toward the Lagrange points like hornets protecting a dying queen. His left hand, missing the 2 smallest fingers since a reactor breach off, Titan 30 years earlier, rested flat on the flickering display, steady even as the station groaned under another glancing kinetic strike. He didn't flinch. He never had. Not when his wife Sophia died in the decompression of Habitat Ring C during the first Xarath inspection that turned into an execution. Not when their daughter Lena, barely 16 then, vanished into the refugee transports that never reached the outer colonies. Not when the last encrypted burst from Earth showed orbital mirrors turning cities into lakes of glass, while the newsfeed still tried to spin it as controlled atmospheric rebalancing. Elias had buried all of it under layers of duty, the way a man buries a still-beating heart under concrete deep enough that it only hurt when he breathed too hard. Colonel Aisha Rahman stepped onto the deck without saluting. She never did anymore. The gesture felt like theater now. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, tracked the casualty ticker, climbing past 80,000 confirmed. "We lost the Cairo relay," she said, voice flat. "No more Satellink with the Nile Basin holdouts." Elias nodded once. "They'll fight house to house anyway. Always have." He didn't look at her. He kept staring at the hollow where a single green dot, his old destroyer, the Relentless, drifted dark and cold near the gas giant's rings, a decoy still broadcasting false heat signatures to draw fire. He'd ordered it himself. Sacrificed his first command to buy 6 more hours for the evacuation fleets. Aisha watched him for a long beat. "You haven't slept in 3 days? Neither have you. I'm not the one carrying the launch codes for the Mercury array." Elias finally turned. The Era 16 relativistic accelerators buried under the sun-scorched crust of Mercury, loaded with nickel iron slugs accelerated to a fraction of light speed, was humanity's last, ugliest insurance policy. Fire them and the Xarath home fleets would be gutted in transit years before they even knew the war was over. Fire them and every human world still breathing would be marked for genocide in perpetuity. Fire them and Elias would become the man who turned mutual assured destruction into doctrine. He rubbed the scarred stumps of his missing fingers against his thumb, an old habit. Sophia used to say, I'd burn the galaxy down before I let anyone take what was ours. His voice cracked on the name, just once, then steadied. She was right. I just never thought I'd have to prove it. Aisha crossed her arms. Lena's still out there somewhere. Scouts picked up a faint beacon from the Oort cloud 2 days ago. Civilian signature. Old pattern could be her transport. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. The hope hurt worse than certainty. If it's her, she's safer staying dark. If it's bait, we're already too deep to bite. He opened his eyes again. We don't get fairy tale endings, Aisha. We get the next breath, then the next fight. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint jasmine oil she still dabbed behind her ears every morning. The same scent her mother had worn back in Lahore before the first relocation edict. Then let me ask you something personal, Elias. Not admiral to colonel. Man to woman who's lost as much as you have. He waited. If we win, if we somehow claw our way out of this, are you going to keep carrying her ghost around like a medal? Or are you going to let yourself remember she loved you when you still laughed? The question landed like a slap. Elias felt his throat close. For the first time in months, he remembered Sophia's laugh, not the polished one she used for state dinners, but the raw, barking one that came when he tried to fix the kitchen recycler and flooded their apartment with dish soap foam. He remembered Lena at 12, sitting cross-legged on the observation deck, drawing star maps with stolen charcoal. Because the hollow ones are too perfect. Daddy, they don't have soul. He remembered promising both of them he'd keep Earth green. He'd failed at that. Spectacularly. I don't know how to stop carrying it, he admitted, quieter than he meant to. Every time I think about standing down, I see their faces. Every time I think about pulling the trigger on Mercury, I see them too. Different expressions, same eyes. Aisha reached out, hesitated, then rested her hand on his forearm. Not comfort, anchor, then use it. Let it make you sharper, not heavier. Because right now half the fleet is following you because they believe in humanity's stubborn streak. And the other half is following because they believe you LL die before you let the Xarath win. Either way, they need you to remember why we're still here. Alarms blared, another Xarath Lancer wing breaking through the outer minefield. Elias straightened, the moment folding itself away like a letter he wasn't ready to finish reading. Get to your station. Coordinate the inner defense grid. I want every scrap of civilian shipping we VA'd got rigged as decoys make them think we re-desperate. Aisha nodded, already moving. At the lift, she paused. Elias, he looked up. When this is over, win or lose, AM, dragging you to whatever S left of a beach somewhere, and we're drinking whatever rotgut survived. No rank, no ghosts. Just two tired people remembering how to breathe. He almost smiled. Almost EL. She disappeared into the lift. Alone again, Elias keyed the Mercury command override. The confirmation screen glowed crimson. One voice print, one retinal, one decision. He stared at his reflection in the dark glass holder, harder eyes like chipped flint. Then he thought of Lena's last message, the one that got through before the relays went dark. Dad, if you're reading this, don't wait for me. Keep going. We're not done yet. He pressed his palm to the scanner. The array status flipped to armed. Somewhere deep in the solar system, 16 silent barrels began to spin up, drawing power from solar collectors that had once fed research outposts and tourist hotels. Elias spoke to the empty deck, voice low and steady. They called us harmless primitives because we still cry at funerals and plant trees over graves. They thought that made us soft. He watched the tactical display as Xarath ships closed on New Eden's last defensive shell. They never understood that the same heart that breaks is the one that refuses to quit. A new contact blinked onto the plot small fast, broadcasting an old civilian ident code from the refugee flotilla. The Oort beacon. His heart kicked once, hard. Could be Lena? Could be a trap? Could be both? Elias opened a private channel to Aisha. Razor 1, you seeing this? Yeah, risky as hell. I know. He took a breath. I'm vectoring a squadron to intercept and verify. If it's real, we extract. If it's bait, we turn it into fireworks. Copy, and Elias. Yeah, don't die before that beach. He cut the link without answering. The deck lights dimmed as power shunted to weapons. Outside the viewport, the gas giant rolled in silence, rings glittering like broken promises. Elias Kane, widower, father without a child, admiral of a species that refused extinction, placed both hands on the rail and leaned forward until his forehead touched the cool armor glass. Come on, you bastards, he whispered to the approaching fleet. Let's see how harmless we really are. Far below, on the glowing curve of Vega Prime, human resistance cells lit signal fires in patterns older than Starflight 3 short, 3 long, 1 long. Come home, we're still fighting. And somewhere in the cold dark between stars, a battered refugee ship with a 16-year-old girl at the helm who looked too much like her mother adjusted course toward The only beacon she still trusted, her father's voice raw and unbroken calling across light years. The war wasn't over, it was just getting personal. The klaxons on New Eden wailed like wounded animals as the Xarath vanguard pierced the inner defense grid, their lancers slicing through the debris field like scalpels through flesh. Admiral Elias Kane gripped the holotable's edge until his knuckles ached, watching the tactical display fracture with new red contacts dozens, then hundreds, blooming across the plot like arterial spray. The Mercury array was armed, humming in the back of his mind like a loaded gun pressed to his own temple. But firing it now would doom the incoming refugee signal that might be Lena. He forced his breathing steady, the recycled air tasting like copper and regret. Status on that beacon? He barked into the voice cutting through the chaos of overlapping reports from engineering, gunnery, and the med bay where screams echoed faintly over open lines. Colonel Aisha Rahman's face flickered onto a secondary screen, her features smudged with soot from a recent hull breach she'd personally sealed. Squadrons closing in. 2 minutes to visual. But Elias scans show Xarath's signatures mixed in. Could be a Trojan horse. He cursed under his breath. The word raw and ancient. A holdover from his dockyard days before the stars called him away from Sophia. And everything that mattered, a Trojan perfect. The Xarath weren't just conquerors. They were artists of deception, weaving psychic lures into their tech that mimicked human distress, calls down to the vocal timbre. If it was a trap, boarding it would flood New Eden with infiltrators. Those sleek, shape-shifting drones that could mimic a Marine's face while gutting the man next to him. But if it was real, if Lena was huddled in some cryopod whispering prayers to a god she'd stopped believing in after her mother's death, he slammed a fist on the console. Divert the interceptors. Use drones only, no manned birds. Scan for biosigns first. Aisha's eyes narrowed. That's 3 more minutes we don't have. The Vanguard's already painting us with targeting lasers. She paused, then softer. You sure about this? For her, Elias met her gaze across the digital divide. For all of them, every ghost we're carrying. He cut the link before doubt could creep in further. Down in the bowels of the station, Petty Officer Marcus Hel-23, fresh from the academies on a Mars that no longer existed, crawled through a maintenance conduit slick with leaking coolant, his toolkit clanking against the narrow walls. The air recyclers were failing here, oxygen dipping into the red, but he pushed on, driven by the memory of his little brother, vaporized in the first orbital strike on Sydney. Marcus had volunteered for the sabotage run. Slip a viral payload into the Xarath command net via a captured probe they desnagged last week. It was suicide odds, 90% failure rate in Sims, but human ingenuity didn't play by odds. He reached the access node, fingers numb as he jacked in the data spike, whispering the activation code like a prayer. Code cascaded across his wrist display. Green, yellow, then red. Shit, he muttered. The probe wasn't just captured, it was bait. Feedback loop engaged, frying his suit's systems and alerting every Xarath sensor within a light second. Alarms shrieked in his helmet as the conduit heated up, automated defenses kicking in. Marcus ripped the spike free, but it was too late. He keyed his with shaking hands. Command, this is Hale. The VA gotta countermeasure some kind of adaptive AI that's learning our hacks faster than we can code them. Static crackled back, then Ilias's voice. Get out of there, son. Fall back to secondary. But Marcus felt the walls closing in, literally bulkhead sealing as the station's own security protocols isolated the breach. He was trapped, alone in the dark with his regrets and a sidearm that suddenly felt too heavy. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act anyway. He pulled a thermal charge from his belt, slapped it to the node, and set the timer for 10 seconds. Tell my family. Tell them we didn't go quiet. The explosion bloomed silent in vacuum, but the shockwave rippled through New Eden, knocking out auxiliary power to the lower decks. Elias felt it in his bones as lights flickered and gravity plates stuttered. Casualty reports flooded in. Hale confirmed Kia along with 2 others caught in the blast radius. Another name on the wall, another hole in the collective soul of humanity. But the sabotage partial as it was bought them time. Xarath Advance stalled for 90 seconds while their AI recalibrated. 90 seconds to make the call on the beacon. Aisha's voice cut through again. Drones are on it. Visuals coming, wait, biosigns positive. Human patterns. But Elias, there's a glitch. The ship's broadcasting a surrender code. Old one. From the early packs, his stomach dropped. Surrender code. The Xarath had cracked those years ago. This wasn't just a trap. It was a scalpel aimed at his heart. Blow it, he ordered, the words tasting like ash. Full spread. Don't let it dock. The squadron complied, missiles streaking silent across the void. The refugees' ship reel or not erupted in a brief, brilliant flower of debris. If Lena was aboard, No, he shoved the thought down, locked it away with Sophia's last scream. Over the habitat comes. Brutal choices. That was command. That was survival. But the stakes climbed higher still. Lord Admiral Kazathior's hologram materialized unbidden on the main display, his mandibles twitching in what Elias now recognized as smug satisfaction. Admiral Kane, the alien intoned, voice modulated to perfect English with a hint of mockery. You destroy your own despite us. How predictably primitive. Elias straightened, ignoring the sweat trickling down his spine. Predictable. You haven't seen half of what we're capable of. Kazathor leaned closer, compound eyes reflecting the tactical chaos. Oh, but we have your Mercury array impressive. For apes, but we've anticipated it. Even now, our operative ensures it will fire wide. Operative Elias's blood ran cold. A human traitor, not just any. Someone with access. He glanced around the deck faces he'd trusted with his life, now shadowed in doubt. Who? The engineer who'd calibrated the array last shift? The comms officer rooting his orders? Paranoia bloomed like radiation sickness. You're bluffing, he said, buying time. Kazath laughed, a wet chittering sound. Am I? Ask your Colonel Rahman. She knows the cost of divided loyalties. The holla cut out. Elias spun to the secondary screen. Aisha, what the hell does that mean? Her face paled. Elias, my brother. He was on the diplomatic team. Went missing after the first contact. I thought he was dead. But if they've turned him, betrayal, not alien, but human worse, familial. The existential threat wasn't just fleets and weapons, it was the rot within, the fractures that empires exploited. Aisha's voice broke. If he's the operative, he could be anywhere. Sabotaging from inside, new alarms screamed Mercury array offline. Manual override locked. Elias felt the deck tilt as another strike landed, hull integrity dropping to 40%. Suffering washed over him in waves. Hale's sacrifice wasted. Potential Lena's death on his hands. Now this, but humanity didn't break. It adapted. He keyed the all hands. This is Kane. We've got a snake in the garden. Lockdown sections, buddy checks, trust but verify. And Aishog it to Mercury control. Manually if you have to. We're not done. She nodded, determination hardening her features. On it, but Elias, if it's him, do what you must. He cut the link, turning to the viewport where Xarath's ships closed like jaws. Innovation in dire straits. They'd rig manual triggers, use civilian hacks, turn the station itself into a ram if needed. The bulkheads of New Eden groaned like a dying beast under the relentless barrage of Xarath. Plasma lances the Station S frame, twisting in ways no engineer had ever stress-tested, because no one ever thought it would come to this humanity's last orbital redoubt, hanging by frayed power cables and sheer bloody-mindedness above the scorched husk of Vega Prime. Admiral Elias Kane staggered as another impact rocked the command deck, his vision blurring from the gash across his forehead where a console had exploded minutes earlier, showering him with hot shards of plasteel and regret. Blood trickled into his eye, warm and sticky, mixing with the sweat that plastered his uniform to his skin, but he didn't wipe it away. There was no time, no point, only the holodisplay flickering erratically before him, showing the Mercury array still offline, its manual overrides jammed by whatever sabotage the traitor had wrought. His missing fingers throbbed with phantom pain, a cruel echo of old wounds, but the real agony clawed deeper. Into the hollow where his family used to live, Sophia's laugh silenced forever, Lena's potential beacon reduced to debris on his orders, and now this, the knife of betrayal twisting in his gut as he realized the operative could only be someone close, someone who'd shared meals, strategies, the thin air of desperation. But her eyes burned fiercer than any wound locked on Elias with a mix of fury and something worse, pity. teaching Lena to pilot Sims with her tiny hands over his, vowing to Aisha over stale coffee that they'd hold the line no matter what. Now, the line was a crumbling wall, and he was the one who'd have to order her to cross it. "Aisha," he said, voice cracking like old leather, "you know what has to be done." She nodded once, sharp and final, but her face crumpled for just a second, the mask slipping to reveal the girl who'd lost her home in the first relocations. The woman who'd buried friends and now faced burying kin. "I do, but Elias, if I go down there, I'm not coming back clean. Not ever." He reached out, gripped her good shoulder, felt the tremor running through her like a live wire. "None of us are. That's the price. But we pay it because the alternative is them winning, erasing us, like a bad footnote." The station's defenses were down to sputtering point lasers and volunteer crews, manning jury-rigged railguns from exposed bays, men and women who'd been accountants, teachers, parents yesterday, now strapped into harnesses, firing wildly into the void, their screams lost in the vacuum but echoing in Elias's mind. One bay went dark on the display, breached, vented, 20 lives snuffed in an instant. He felt each one like a punch to the chest, the cumulative toll pressing him toward the breaking point where spirit alone had to hold. Down in the lower decks, survivors huddled in sealed compartments, sharing oxygen recyclers that hummed on emergency power, parents whispering lies to children about how the monsters would go away soon. While medics triaged the impossible, an engineer with half his face gone begging for a gun to end it, a pilot clutching a hala of her family as internal bleeding turned her lips blue. Humanity's ingenuity had gotten them this far, repurposed mining drones as kamikaze swarms hacked Xarath probes, turned against their makers. Even a desperate broadcast of viral code that briefly scrambled enemy targeting, but now it was stripped bare, nothing left but raw, will the unyielding refusal to fade quietly into the galactic night. Elias watched Aisha gear up for the suicide run to the Nexus, her hand steady as she checked her sidearm and slapped a fresh power cell into her rifle, but he saw the fracture in her eyes, the moral gravity pulling her under. Kill her brother, save the array, fire the slugs that might doom innocence on distant worlds, but buy humanity a fighting chance. "Wait," he said suddenly, voice hoarse. "I'm coming with you." She shook her head. "No, you're needed here. If we both go, if we don't, it's over anyway." The deck shuddered again, lights dying to emergency red, casting long shadows that danced like accusations. Lord Admiral Kazothiler's voice crackled over the open channel, uninvited, smug as ever. "Surrender now, primitives. Your station fractures, your weapons fail. Accept stewardship or embrace oblivion." Elias keyed the response without thinking. Oblivion. But inside, doubt gnawed physical limits, screaming as his body begged for rest. Psychological walls crumbling under the siege of loss, betrayal, the sheer cosmic unfairness of it all. Aisha met his gaze one last time. "For them," she whispered, "for Sophia, Lena, her brother, every soul clinging to life in this floating coffin." They moved out together, descending into the smoke-choked corridors where bulkheads buckled and sparks rained from overhead conduits. The air thick with the stench of burning composites and fierce sweat. Gunfire echoed ahead, loyal security teams holding the line against infiltrators, but falling back step by bloody step. Elias's sidearm bucked in his hand as they rounded a corner, dropping a shapeshifter mid-transformation, its form bubbling grotesquely before stilling. Pain lanced through his side shrapnel or a graze. He couldn't tell, but he pushed on. Spirit feeling what flesh could not, the visceral throb of human defiance turning agony into fuel. They reached the Nexus, a fortified chamber, now a charnel house, bodies strewn across the floor, human and alien alike, and there, wired into the control throne like a grotesque marionette, sat Aisha's brother, eyes vacant, skin pallid under Xarath neural implants that pulsed with alien light. Aisha's finger tightened on the trigger, tears carving tracks through the grime on her face. "Forgive me," she whispered. The shot echoed like thunder, blood spraying across the controls. But in that instant, as the implants sparked and died, the array flickered back on line manual fire possible. But at the cost of her soul, his trust, their shared humanity pushed to the brink. Elias slammed the authorization, slugs hurtling toward destiny, but the Xarath were inside now. Closing on the Nexus, the fleet's jaws snapping shut. Something had to change now, or all would be lost in the void's indifferent embrace. The Nexus chamber reeked of ozone and charred flesh. Aisha's rifle still smoking from the shot that ended her brother's tortured existence, his body, slumped in the control throne with neural implants flickering out, like dying stars, blood pooling on the grated floor, where it mixed with Elias's own from the wounds he'd ignored too long. Admiral Elias Kane slammed the authorization sequence into the console, fingers slick and trembling, the Mercury array finally humming to life deep in the solar heart. Relativistic slugs spinning up to velocities that would punch through Xarath holes light years away, but it was too late for New Eden. The station's corridors echoing with the thunder of boarding pods breaching the outer hull, Xarath warriors pouring in like a tidal wave of Carapace death, their energy lances carving through bulkheads and defenders alike. Elias grabbed Aisha's arm, pulling her toward the emergency hatch as alarms screamed critical failure across every system. The deck plating buckling under kinetic impacts that felt like the universe itself pounding on the door. "We have to move," he rasped, voice raw from smoke and shouting, but she yanked free, eyes wide with a grief that twisted into something sharper, fiercer human defiance distilled into a single, unblinking stare. Gunfire rattled closer, loyal Marines falling back in ragged lines, their coil guns barking defiance against alien armor that shrugged off rounds like rain. Elias felt the weight of it all, the losses, the betrayals, the endless grind of a war that had stripped humanity to its bones, pressing him toward collapse. But he shoved it down, drawing on that deep, primal well where exhaustion met rage and birthed something unbreakable. They burst into the main corridor, joining a knot of survivors, a medic with a bandaged stump for an arm, an engineer clutching a data spike like a talisman, a young ensign whose face was a mask of terror barely held in check. "Admiral," the ensign gasped. "They're everywhere. Decks 3 through 7 are gone." Elias nodded, mind racing for options that didn't exist. The station's AI core offline, power flickering to nothing, leaving them in strobing red emergency lights that painted everything in blood. Then it happened, the twist that shattered everything, recontextualizing the entire invasion in a blaze of revelation. A low hum built from the walls themselves, not the failing reactors, but something deeper, older, woven into New Eden's very framework during its construction decades ago, a black budget project buried under layers of classified seals that even Elias had only heard whispers about. Project Echo, humanity's game-changer, a quantum entanglement network seated across every human outpost, ship, and colony, linking not just coms, but minds, uploaded consciousnesses of the greatest human thinkers, warriors, and innovators who'd volunteered to echo. Beyond death, dormant until a species-level threat triggered the activation threshold. The hum crescendoed into a symphony of voices, ghostly holograms flickering to life in the corridors, Ophia's face among them. Digitized and serene, her eyes meeting Elias's with a recognition that punched the air from his lungs. "Elias," her voice echoed, layered with a dozen others. "We've been waiting." Awe washed over him, followed by a regret, so sharp it nearly buckled his knees. Sophia hadn't died in that habitat breach. She'd uploaded in secret, part of the program to preserve humanity's edge, a sacrifice she'd hidden from him to spare the pain. The Xarath had known somehow, that's why they'd come. Not to uplift primitives, but to exterminate a threat they'd uncovered in ancient galactic archives. Humans were unjust survivors. They were the descendants of a forgotten empire that had seeded the stars with AI guardians like Echo, designed to awaken and amplify human potential when extinction loomed. Fear gripped Elias, not of death, but of what this meant. The Xarath's benevolent invasion was a preemptive strike. Their patronizing labels a smokescreen for terror at what humanity could become. Aisha stared at the holograms, her brother's death fresh in her mind. Vengeance boiling up as one Echo, a grizzled general from Earth's old wars, spoke. "Integrating now. Stand by for augmentation." Pain lanced through every human on the station, a neural surge that felt like fire in the veins. But when it cleared, Elias felt more. His wounds knit closed, senses sharpened to razor edges, mind expanding with tactical overlays from 1,000 echoed strategies. The ensign straightened, eyes glowing faintly, his fear transmuted to predatory calm. "Holy shit," he whispered, awe and hope mingling in his voice. Outside, the Xarath advance faltered as Echo hacked their comms, broadcasting recontextualized truths. intercepted Xarath logs revealing their council's panic over the Echo anomaly, orders to glass human worlds before the network could activate. Lord Admiral Kezuthior's flagship recoiled in orbit, shields flaring as Echo repurposed New Eden's failing weapons into precision strikes that pierced alien armor like paper. Elias laughed a raw, triumphant sound that echoed through the corridors, human spirit amplified, turning the siege into a rout. "They were afraid of us all along," he said to Aisha, voice steady now, laced with the echoes of generations. "Called us primitives to keep us down. But we were the ones who built the cage they're trapped in." She nodded, rifle raised, regret for her brother softening into resolve as they charged the breach, augmented Marines flanking them, moving with unnatural speed and coordination. Xarath warriors' once towering nightmares crumpled under enhanced fire, their mandibles clicking in confusion as humans dodged lances with prescient grace, countered with improvised weapons that now hit like thunderbolts. The twist spread beyond New Eden. Across Vega Prime ground forces felt the surge farmers and refugees, rising with echoed knowledge turning scavenged tech into alien downfall machines. Railguns overclocked to relativistic speeds, drones swarming with hive mind tactics drawn from ancient battles. Hope bloomed in Ilias's chest, mingled with vengeance for the lies, the losses, the underestimation that had cost so much. Sophia's hologram flickered beside him, her hand ghosting through his. "We did this for Lena, for all of them," she whispered, and he felt tears burn his eyes, not from pain but from the overwhelming fuck yeah rush of humanity reclaiming its place. The Mercury slugs, now guided by Echo's quantum net, didn't just destroy, they disrupted Xarath warp drives across the fleet, stranding invaders in human space where augmented forces could pick them apart. Kezuthior's transmission cut in, voice cracking for the first time. "What are you?" Elias keyed the response, surrounded by echoes of humanity's finest. "We're the thing you feared? The primitives who rewrite the rules?" The Admiral's mandibles trembled in visible fear as his command deck erupted in chaos. Human boarders teleported via entangled shortcuts, Echo unlocked materializing amid his guards. Regret flashed in Ilias's mind for the war's toll, but it fueled the intensity. The moral gravity of turning survival into dominance. Aisha fought beside him, her movements a blur, taking down 3 Xarath with precise shots, hope lighting her face as she shouted. For every world they burned. The station stabilized, power surging from nowhere as Echo drew energy from quantum foam, a trick human scientists had theorized but never dared test until now. Across the system, Xarath ships bloomed into fireballs, their downfall swift and total, recontextualizing the conflict from desperate defense to inevitable victory. Elias paused amid the wreckage, Sophia's echo fading as the threat receded, leaving him with a quiet awe. Humanity wasn't just resilient. They were the galaxy's hidden apex predators, their primitive emotions the key to unlocking godlike potential. Vengeance satisfied, hope dawning, he turned to Aisha. "It's over," he said, but she shook her head, eyes fierce. "No, it's just beginning." The twist had flipped everything. Aliens afraid, humans dangerous, the stars now theirs to claim with unbridled defiance. The augmented surge from Project Echo coursed through Elias, Kane's veins like liquid fire knitting his wounds and sharpening his senses to a predatory edge as he charged down the buckling corridors of New Eden. Aisha, Rahman at his side, their boots pounding against the grating in sync with the station's dying heartbeat. Holographic echoes flickered around them, ghosts of humanity's finest, including Sophia's serene form guiding their steps with tactical whispers that turned chaos into calculated fury. Xarath warriors swarmed the breaches, their carapached forms towering and relentless, energy lances scorching the air with violet plasma. But now the humans moved like shadows given teeth, dodging blasts with prescient grace and countering with overclocked coil guns that punched through alien armor like wet cardboard. Elias felt the weight of every lost. Lena's potential beacon destroyed, Aisha's brother slain by her own hand. The countless defenders vented into the void, but it fueled him, transmuting grief into the raw, unyielding roar that had defined his species since they first stood upright on ancient plains and stared down predators twice their size. Flank left, Sophia's echo murmured in his ear, her voice a bomb and a blade, revealing paths through the smoke that no unaugmented eye could see. They burst into a contested bay where Xarath troops had pinned down a squad of Marines, the aliens, mandibles clicking in triumphant chitters as they advanced. But Elias and Aisha hit them like a storm-hurt rifle, barking precise bursts that shattered joints and visors. His sidearm, finding weak points amplified by echoed knowledge from 1,000 forgotten battles. The Marines rallied, their faces lighting with awe as the augmentation spread via proximity entanglement, turning exhausted fighters into superhuman avengers. One by one the Xarath fell, not to superior tech, but to human ingenuity amplified. A welder's torch repurposed as a plasma cutter, a cargo crane swung, Like a battering ram, improvised explosives from station rations that bloomed into firestorms of defiance. Outside, the void boiled with the final stand-augmented human ships, once ragtag freighters, and museum relics now swarming the Xarath fleet with coordinated precision, Echo's quantum net weaving them into a single, unstoppable organism. Lord Admiral Kazuthvir's flagship loomed at the center, its obsidian hull bristling with weapons that had cracked worlds, but now it faltered under the onslaught, shields flickering as mercury slugs guided unerringly by echoed calculations slammed home, carving glowing rents that spewed atmosphere and debris. Kazuthvir paced his command deck, mandibles trembling not with rage but with the dawning horror of miscalculation. These primitives were unjust resilient. They were the galaxy's boogeyman, their harmless label a lullaby sung to keep the truth buried. Human borders materialized via entangled shortcuts, Marines in patched suits storming bridges with feral grins, shouting war cries in a babel of languages that echoed through Xarath. Comes like a virus. Elias and Aisha fought their way to New Eden's core, the station's reactor throbbing erratically as Xarath saboteurs closed in. But the echoes anticipated every move. A physicist's ghost rewriting local gravity to crush an infiltrator against the wall, a strategist's insight turning a ventilation shaft into a kill zone. Aisha took a glancing lance to the leg, pain flaring hot and real despite the augmentation, but she pushed on, teeth gritted, vengeance for her brother burning brighter than the wound. "We end this," she growled, and Elias nodded, their bond forged in fire, now unbreakable, a testament to the human connections that no alien empire could sever. They reached the command nexus, overriding the locks with Echo's help, only to find a final Xarath elite guard augmented themselves with stolen human tech barring the way to the stations. Self-destruct which Kazuthvir had remotely triggered as a last spiteful act. The beast charged Lance's worry, but Elias dove under the swing, Aisha covering with suppressing fire, and together they dismantled it piece by piece. A shot to the knee, a knife to the joint echoed precision, turning brute force against itself. As the guard crumpled, Elias slammed the abort sequence, stabilizing the reactor just as the station's hull groaned its loudest protest. But the real climax thundered in orbit. Xarath's flagship, besieged from within and without, its decks running with alien ichor as human borders pressed the advantage. Elias patched into the fleet comms, his voice broadcast across every channel, raw and triumphant. "This is Admiral Kane. To every human still fighting, hold the line. To the Xarath, you came for primitives. You're leaving as footnotes." The Mercury array fired its final volley, slugs threading through the chaos to core the flagship's engines, a chain reaction blooming into a supernova that engulfed the Xarath command structure. Kazuthvir's last transmission crackled through, a plea, desperate and broken. "Mercy. We were wrong." But mercy wasn't in the cards. Not after the burned worlds, the lost families, the underestimation that had awakened the beast. The flagship detonated in a blinding flash, shockwaves rippling through the fleet, scattering survivors who warped away in panicked retreat. Their empire's might shattered against humanity's roar. On New Eden, cheers echoed through the surviving compartments. Survivors emerging from bunkers with wide-eyed wonder, the augmentation fading as the threat receded, leaving them enhanced but human-scarred, weary, alive. Elias slumped against a console, Aisha beside him, her head on his shoulder, the weight of victory heavy but shared. Sophia's echo materialized one last time, her hand ghosting his cheek. "You did it, love. For Lena, for all of us." Tears came then, hot and unashamed. As scouts reported a faint signal from the debris field, the real Lena cryopod intact, hidden in the Trojan's wreckage by clever misdirection. Regret mingled with joy, sacrifices earned, not wasted. Aisha squeezed his hand. "We didn't just survive, we roared." Elias nodded, staring out at the stars now cleared of threats, Vega Prime below beginning to stir with rebuilding lights. Humanity hadn't won by magic or luck, but by the gritty truth that when pushed to the edge, they didn't break. They evolved, connected, fought with every scrap of heart and mind. The Xarath downfall was complete, their fear validated too late, leaving the galaxy to whisper warnings about the harmless primitives who had ascended through fire. As medics arrived and the station stabilized, Elias allowed himself a small, tired smile, the emotional beat of hope. Dawning plotlines resolved in blood and triumph room left for tomorrow's stories, where humanity unbroken would reach further, roar, louder, and never again be underestimated. The final stand had become the first step into a brighter, harder-won future. Years passed like quiet breaths after the Xarath fleet shattered above Vega Prime. The supernova bloom of Kazuthvir's flagship becoming the new constellation that generations of human children would point to and name the fall. New Eden, scarred and limping, refused to die. Its surviving crew patched the hull with salvaged alien composites, rerouted power from jury-rigged Xarath reactors, and turned the station into the beating heart of a reborn humanity. Admiral Elias Kane Gray now. The missing fingers on his left hand, a permanent reminder, stepped down from command the day the first civilian transport docked with refugees from the hidden Orb pods. Among them was Lena, older than he remembered, eyes carrying the same steel as her mother's. And tear-streaked engineers, and wrapped her arms around the man who'd ordered the destruction of what he thought was her ship. "You kept going," she whispered into his shoulder. "That's what mattered." Elias held her tighter, the last pieces of his grief finally loosening their grip. Aisha Rahman stood a respectful distance away, legs still braced from the nexus wound that never quite healed right, watching the reunion with a small, private smile. She had carried the weight of her brother's death every day since the shot, the echo of his final distorted words haunting her dreams, but time and purpose had worn the edges smooth. She became the station's de facto ambassador to the scattered human colonies, traveling between rebuilt outposts on Vega Prime, the reclaimed rings of Saturn, and the new settlements sprouting on Mars like stubborn green shoots after a long winter. Wherever she went, people asked about the day the primitives roared back, and she told them the truth. It wasn't one hero, one weapon, one miracle. It was every small refusal to kneel, every connection forged in the dark, every echo of the dead refusing to let the living quit. Project Echo itself faded as the threat receded, its quantum entanglement network powered down to standby, the uploaded minds of Sophia and the others choosing to rest rather than linger as eternal overseers. Sophia's last hologram appeared to Elias one quiet night in the observation deck. Stars wheeling slow outside the viewport. She looked exactly as she had the day they met, laugh lines, and all but her voice carried the calm of someone who had seen the end and found it gentle. "We're proud of you," she said simply. "All of us. Live loud enough for the rest." Then she was gone, leaving only the soft hum of the station and the faint jasmine scent that lingered in the air long after the projection dissolved. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy in a blaze of vengeance. They rebuilt it, piece by piece, with the same gritty ingenuity that had carried them from African savannas to the stars. The Xarath remnant scattered fleets and broken council worlds sent envoys within a decade, not as conquerors but as supplicants, offering reparations and uneasy alliances. The Ascendant Concord was dissolved. In its place rose the concordance of free species with humanity at the table, not as clients or primitives, but as equals who had proven beyond any doubt that underestimation was the deadliest mistake any empire could make. Elias and Lena settled on Vega Prime's southern continent. In a small valley where golden fields still waved under twin suns despite the scars of orbital bombardment, they planted trees over the sites of old mass graves, each sapling a quiet promise that life would outlast war. Aisha visited often, bringing stories from the frontier and the latest generation of cadets who had grown up hearing about the day the harmless primitives turned the tables. She and Elias never married, neither felt the need for ceremony when the bond they shared had been forged in fire and loss, but they shared sunsets on the porch, talking about the people they'd lost and the ones they'd saved, laughing at the absurdity of it all. One evening, as the suns dipped low and painted the sky in bruised purples, Lena joined them with her own daughter, a bright-eyed girl named Sophia, toddling between their knees. The child pointed at the new constellation overhead and asked, "What's that one called, Grandpa?" Elias lifted her onto his lap, the missing fingers gentle against her small back. "That's the fall," he told her. "It's where the old empire learned that you don't try to put a leash on people who spent their whole history refusing to stay down." Lena smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And where we learned we're stronger together than any of us ever were alone." Aisha raised her glass simple water because the good stuff was still rationed, and they drank to the dead, to the living, to the stubborn, beautiful mess of human evolution that had carried them through alien resistance, betrayal, despair, and finally into something like peace. The galaxy whispered their story now, not as myth but as warning and inspiration. Never mistake resilience for weakness. Never call defiance primitive. Never assume the quiet ones aren't planning their roar. On clear nights, Elias still walked the fields alone, looking up at the stars that no longer felt hostile. He thought of Sophia's final words, of Aisha's steady presence, of Lena's hand in his, of the child who would grow up never knowing what it felt like to be called harmless. He felt the old ache, the scars that never fully faded, but it was tempered now by a deep, quiet triumph. They hadn't just survived, they had become the thing the universe had to reckon with, and in that reckoning, they found not conquest, but belonging a hard-won place among the stars, earned in blood and laughter, and the unbreakable will to keep standing. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.